Hi, this is my review of Monsters of Faerun. Monsters of Faerun is a Monster Compendium for Dungeons and Dragons 3.0, but it can also be used with D&D 3.5 or Pathfinder. However, the monsters here have a lot to do with the deities, powers, and lost empires of Faerun. That is, you will find many monsters that are direct servants of different deities and remnants of ancient civilizations, etc. Now let's talk about the quality of the book. It's a soft cover book. However, it's quite sturdy considering I've been using it for quite a while. The cover is actually quite nice because there are some soft covers that the plastic starts to become all wrinkled and bent, but this is actually quite sturdy. However, it's starting to become a bit yellowish in certain areas, and the quality of the paper is pretty good. It's not like glossy paper, but it's also quite resistant to wear and tear. And the illustrations, which I will be showing you in a few minutes, they are somewhat, well, you have some pretty cool ones, but at the same time you have some others that feel a bit plain when compared to other illustrations. And the book is well organized and written as well. You even have monsters ranked by challenge ratings. You also have alphabetical listing of monsters, etc. Now let's talk about the contents. First, they give you a basic structure that you will find in many other monster manuals from Dungeons and Dragons 3.0, 3.5, etc. You will have your introduction, presentation, instructions on how to read the different entries, all the information concerning the stats, different monster feats. That of course you will be able to use these feats with player characters if you are using monstrous player characters. And then you start getting all the information on different beasts, non-player characters, etc. One of the cool things is that you have all the information related to the Forgotten Realms. That is, for example, take the Aarakocra, and you have all the information of that type of monster when it comes to the culture of that magical creature, details on the Aarakocra society, and everything related to the Forgotten Realms, where they live, the different tribes or cities or dungeons that contain such creatures. You also have some classics like the Avalin. I remember this one from AD&D. This illustration is somewhat plain. As I was telling you, some of the illustrations are quite nice, but this one, when compared to the others, it seems a bit plain or somewhat unremarkable. You also have a bunch of Avishai that, if you remember correctly, these are the basically demons, but because of the taboo that happened when Advanced Dungeons and Dragons came along, they had to rename them like that, but they are basically demons. You also have some, as I was telling you, deity-specific monsters, such as the Bane Dead and the Bane Guard. Here you have an illustration of the, I think that's the Bane Guard, of course. That's basically a skeleton that shoots magic missiles. And the Bane Dead over here. You also have a lot of dragons, different types of... Oh, here's another monster. This one is related to the Red Wizards of Thay, the Chosen One. And it's basically a way to punish their enemies. They create these undead creatures out of those enemies. You also have classics like the Crawling Claw, also quite popular in horror settings. And you also have the infamous Deep Spawn. Now the deep spawn, which is right here, kind of looks like a beholder, but it's not. Let me see if I can get that into focus. It's basically this fleshy sphere that is quite large actually, and it eats monsters. Anything that it devours, well, monsters, humans, etc. It can basically like create a clone of that. It reminds me a bit of, I don't remember the season of Robotech where I saw this. I think it was second season, where there was this alien force that basically like consumed humans and brought out like a clone type of human, but that clone retained memories and traits of the original creature. And the same thing happens with the deep spawn. Those monsters that are produced by the deep spawn, that are kind of like vomited out, they still have some memories, and they have all the powers and abilities that they had when they were alive, so to speak. And so the deep spawn were quite popular. So for example, many evil wizards kind of made like agreements or pacts with deep spawn, and they placed them in dungeons or vaults, etc., so that they would serve as sort of like guardians, populating the entire area with the monsters that they had devoured. But sometimes they also raised these deep spawns to keep them sort of like magical pets. However, deep spawns are chaotic evil, and so they were somewhat unreliable, and they usually had to threaten them or control them in some other way, maybe through magic. And some were even used by the Centarim, for example, when they wanted to block a trade route. They placed a deep spawn there, and they're kind of like a plague because they were constantly producing monsters under their control. You also have another classic, the Yochlol, or the Handmaiden of Love. As you know, the spider deity, spider queen of the Drow. I never really understood why these were so important for LoL, because they kind of look like melted candle things of sorts with an eye and tentacles, and it doesn't seem spidery. They can turn into spiders, but I would expect like a monstrous demonic type of spider to be the Handmaiden of Love, not this kind of like blobbish mess of sorts. You also have a lot of dragons and dragonkin. This is a pretty cool image, some of the dragons and dragonkin. I forgot to mention that you also have information on beholders that are kind of like specific to the Forgotten Realms. You even have like a sort of like a class of beholder. Here it is. It's the beholder prestige class mage, and this is basically a beholder that took out its central eye, because as many of you know, beholders, their central eye produce sort of like an anti-magic cone, negating all spells, and so it took its eye out so it can use spells with ease. You also have different types of beholders as well. And here's another creature specific to the deities of the Forgotten Realms. It's the Beast of Malar. You also have some beasts related to more ancient portfolios and powers and deities of the Forgotten Realms. Not many, but there are a few of them. Let me show you some others. I really like this illustration. This is the Helmed Horror. You also have there was this other monster that was quite ridiculous in my opinion. Of course, the Tall Mouther. Basically, I mentioned it in another video. I think it's kind of like a gorilla head with multiple arms, and they're actually kind of like the arch enemies or nemesis of the halflings, and they were used in so many ridiculous ways when Dungeons and Dragons 3.0 first came out, because I remember that in one adventure, I think it was one of the, yes, it was one of the adventures of the Shardalon campaign that started with the Sunless Citadel. I think it was called something Spire, and there you had this tall mouther, this gorilla with multiple arms, but gorilla head, but it was also a vampire, and that was quite ridiculous. There was a reason because it ended up like that, but it still seemed like such a ridiculous type of monster. It felt like the dungeon master was thinking, oh, I need something to challenge the players. Oh, how about this tall mouther, because it has multiple arms, it can do multiple slam attacks, and they will drain the energy of the player characters. But vampire tall mouther is just quite ridiculous. I can already imagine a vampire. I cannot imagine a vampire kind of like turning a tall mouther into a vampire. As I was telling you, it didn't turn out that way because it was attacked by a vampire, but it was because of some magical effect of an adventure site. But it's still, when the player characters first encounter such a thing, they're going to be like, how did that happen? As I was telling you, it has that sense of ridiculousness because, well, let's say, either the vampire killed that thing with its slam attacks, or the vampire took a bite out of the tall mouther. But can you imagine a vampire biting a gorilla head with multiple arms? That's kind of weird. The vampire is going to be like, not on the first date. So it was somewhat of a ridiculous monster. Now there are a couple of monsters that I think are quite important for the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. They add a bit of a Lovecraftian feel to the setting as a whole. Let me see if I can find the other. I found one, but let's see if I can get to the other. It's over here. Aha! First, it's the Faerun, and the Faerun are basically these things that look like mindless lamprey or lich-like monsters, but they are actually very intelligent. In fact, many of them are sorcerers. And you also have the Sharn. The Sharn that kind of like have 3 heads, and they actually have small eyes in their palms. You cannot really see it there, but they have eyes in their palms. And these are 2 of the most ancient inhabitants of Faerun. They actually, the Faerun, the first ones, actually try to eliminate all life in Faerun. They have plans on genocide and world domination. And believe it or not, the Sharn are actually like the more friendlier of the 2, to put it in a way, because they simply do not care about other living creatures. They just want to carry on with their own magical experiments of sorts, and they're advancing their civilizations, etc. But the Faerun, they just want to dominate and kill. So it's actually not uncommon for the player characters to become allies of the Sharn. The Faerun are quite powerful, so becoming an ally of the Sharn, at least for a moment, could actually be a positive thing. So these 2 characters, they give you a lot of potential adventure seeds. You also have some templates at the end. For example, you have the Beast of Zim, that is basically a creature again related to a former aspect of Bane, if I'm not mistaken. You also have a Cursed, which is basically an undead creature. When a wizard casts, or some type of priest or whatever, casts a curse upon an enemy, that enemy could end up turning into a cursed. So it's an undead creature that is kind of like suffering all the time, and it's actually quite insane. You also have details on ghosts. Dragon Ghost and Beholder. I don't feel that to be as scary, because imagine a giant ghost. You're more like terrified of its size rather than of its undead nature or essence, to put it in a way. You also have details on how to different leagues. That is, for example, Mind Flayer leagues, which are actually quite, what would you say, like a staple of the past of the Forgotten Realms. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video. You also have details on good lists, because some spellcasters just want to become immortal to further a more noble cause. Well, or immortality through undead. You have details on different types of lycanthropic beasts, details on the Yuan Ti. It's actually pronounced Yuan Ti, I think, because I used to say Yuan Ti, but then I played a Forgotten Realms video game, I think it was Demon Stone, and they were constantly saying the Yuan Ti, like, sure, Yuan Ti. And that's basically it. There are many other monsters that I could show you, but this is basically just like a sample of it all. So what do I think of the Monsters of Faerun Monster Compendium? Well, I think this is actually a pretty good book. There is only one negative thing to it, and it's that many, well, not many, but a lot of the monsters here, you actually you see them in other source books. In other Forgotten Realms books of different areas, of different kingdoms, etc., you have many of the monsters in those books. So this is basically like a compilation of all those monsters, but at the same time, this is quite handy to have, because maybe you want to use many different monsters from different areas of Faerun, and so you don't have to keep all your books open at the table. You just need to keep this handy, because otherwise you're going to have like 3 or 4 books and you're going to be searching constantly for different backgrounds of the monsters and such. I also really like it that they include all the details, well, at least brief but to the point and concise details on the background of each monster and how it's related to the realms. All the details concerning culture and society. There were some that they don't specify, some things like concerning languages and other cultural aspects, but in general, each one of these monsters serves as a tool not only to create adventures in the Forgotten Realms, because you already have all the links and information concerning deities, Forgotten Realms or ancient kingdoms, but they also can be introduced into an existing campaign without messing things up, because it makes sense that they are in that specific area or related to that specific adventure, some sort of ancient prophecy, etc. So this is actually a really good book, and if you are running the Forgotten Realms for Dungeons & Dragons 3.0, 3.5, or even if you are using Pathfinder with Forgotten Realms, I highly recommend that you get Monsters of Faerun, because it's quite handy, even though, as I was telling you, some of the monsters are in other source books. It's quite handy to have most of them here. And there are also a few monsters that only appear in this book. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.